Continuing building the story section that we've been building in the last lecture, we will now implement this hover effect that we have here. So as soon as we hover a story, we have two things going on in that image. So first, take a look and see what the image is doing. So basically the image is zooming out, okay? And then we have the text moving in and also the image getting blurred. So the image moves away and blurs, and the text moves up and fades in. Okay, and so that's a really nice effect, I thought, and so I included it here in the course. So let's start by adding the text actually, which will be our fig caption here. So a special HTML element for captions for figures. So fig caption, and I'm calling it story caption very simply. And so let's just put the name of the person here, and it was Mary Smith. So Mary Smith. All right, now where do we want this caption to be located? Well, we want it to be exactly on top of the image, right? So nicely centered on top of the image. Let's take a look at that again. So here it's exactly in the middle, both vertically and horizontally. So let's do that. And I'm sure you can guess it. We use position absolute. And then you can also guess that we need to set the container to position relative. And the container is in this case the story shape, right? So position relative. And then here it's the same thing as always. So top 50%, left 50%, and then translate minus 50% and minus 50%. And this time I don't have to explain it again to you why this works this way, right? So the color of the text was white with uppercase. Also with a nice font size, let's say 1.7 rem. And of course the text in there, in this box, should also be centered. Okay, so let's take a look at that now. All right, so it's nicely in the center here. Now what we want here to happen actually is when we hover this box here, so this story, is that this here moves up to the position and fades in. So what this means is that before we hover it, it actually needs to be invisible and it needs to be further down to this direction. So down here, so that it can then move up. So we should translate it down, but actually we already have to translate here. So it's minus 50 and minus 50. And so here on the epsilon coordinate, we can actually put 0 again, because then it would be a bit further down, right? You see, so now it's in here. And we could put it even more down if we wanted. We could say like, I don't know, 20% for example, and then it would move down even further, okay? And then we just set the opacity to 0. And so this is the initial state before we actually do the hover animation. Now, where does this hover actually occur? As we said, it's right here on the story, okay? And so we say story. So as soon as the story is hovered, then we want to change the caption, right? Makes sense? So, and what do we want to change? Well, the opacity to 1, of course. Anti-transform should translate in Y to minus 50%. Okay, and why is that? Well, it's because the minus 50% is what we had here before, okay? So remember, the initial position was with this here at minus 50, but that's not what we want, but it's what we want after we hover on the story. Now I see a stupid mistake here once again. So it is hover, obviously it's hover. So I just invented a new pseudo class there, okay? So let's see if it works, but not before, of course, animating it as well. So transition, let's say all here, and 0.5 seconds. So let's check it out now. And well, that's not exactly what we wanted, but I think I know what the problem is here, and it is because we didn't have the exact same transform here. So it should be this exact translate. So not translate here, then translate y here. So instead, we should have this. And so this is where the minus 50% goes. All right. Yep, so that's what we want, right? Oh, and you saw that movement here in the end. So that little shaking, let me show it to you again. So you see at the end, it moved like a little bit, okay? So let's add, once again, back face visibility to this element. So remember we did this in the header as well, just to fix this small glitch. And so now it should be gone. Yep. I don't know if you saw it before, but it was definitely there. It moved like 1 pixel to the right side or to the left. And so now that is absolutely gone. And so now the second part of this animation is this image, which blurs and moves away. And actually I see that this image here is in a different position. So this lady here is nicely centered, while in here she's not. So let's take care of that. And let me show you why that happens. Okay, so this is where this image is. You see this blue box? That's where the image is. And so I guess we should translate the image itself to be more in the center of the figure, right? So let's do that. So let's translate this image a little bit. And where is it? Here. So transform, translate X, and let's say -4 rem. Okay. And so now we can work on that effect that we just saw. So again, it's when we hover the story, and then what we want to change is actually the image. Okay, and the first thing that happened was that it zoomed out, okay? And well, that looks a bit strange. So somehow because of this translation that we did here, it cut out this thing. So let's fix that. And what's going to fix that is once again backface visibility hidden. Okay, so whenever we're dealing with this kind of like animations and translating stuff, when something weird happens, then many times this backface visibility fixes that. And again, as I explained to you before, I guess no one really knows why it happens this way or why this works this way. But what matters is that it actually does work. So, okay. I found this out myself also the hard way through a lot of experimenting and searching on Stack Overflow and all that stuff. And so now I can teach that to you, okay? So just to make sure again how this works, we zoom out the image when we hover, okay? So what that means is that initially we have to zoom in a bit, so scale it basically, and then when we hover, set the scale to a lower value so that it happens like this. You see? Basically we scaled the image down. So let's do that. So in initial state, we need to add some scale here. Let's say it's at 140%, so 1.4. And then as soon as we hover the image, we want it to be, well, let's actually copy it. Okay, and then we want it at 1 as soon as we hover it. And so that should work now. So let's go to our version. And indeed, all we have to add, of course, is now this transition. So it's the same as this one. So let's just copy it. And here we go. Very nice. So that looks nice already. Now all we have to do is to add that blur. And actually it's not only blur, but it also gets a bit darker, this image, as we hover it. So take a look. It gets a bit darker. Maybe you didn't see it right away, but actually it did get a bit darker. And so let's learn about filters. So there's a very nice CSS property, which is simply called filter. And in there, you have a lot of different filters that you can apply. So let's use blur and use 3 pixels. And again, I'm going to show you different values in the DevTools then in the inspector. And then also, since we want to make it darker, let's say we want brightness. And then a value lower than 100% makes it darker, and the value above 100% makes it brighter, basically, okay? And so that should do the trick. So that's it. It's blurred and it is darker than it was before. So let me now show you some different values. So this is where the hover is applied, right? So we can go to the DevTools, hit this one here and then on hover. And so now we can see it hovered even without actually hovering it with the mouse, okay? And then here we see our CSS styles. So we can blur it even more. So this is what it looks like when it's even really blurred. So we had 3, 6 also looks great, but let's leave it at this. And then in here, so 100 is the original. We put it at 80, but we can make it really dark if we want, or really bright, something like this. Okay. And there are, of course, other filters. So we have blur, brightness, contrast, grayscale, hue, rotate. Let's check that one out. 50%. Or maybe it's in degrees actually, if it's rotate. 50 degrees. So you saw there's a difference there. So lots of filters here going on. You can give it more opacity, saturate it, put a sepia filter, and so you can definitely experiment with those, okay? So alright, this is already completed. Now all we have to do is to add the second box below it, and then also that small button that we have here. So this one, okay? So that shouldn't be all too hard. Let's just head over to the HTML and add another one of these rows. So number 9 this time. This person is called Jack Wilson. And then let's just change his text. Wow, my life is completely different now. All right, and that should work already. Yep. So no surprises here, it works just as before. And now just a small button here, just to make it really complete, okay. So this is pretty similar to the one that we had before in here. So here we had this green button going on. This time we want the other button. So we have the button green and the normal button. And then I think the other one is called button text. Let's see if that works. I'm not really sure. Let's check it out here in the button. So button text. So only one dash there, because it's not a modifier, it's just a different name. So button text. And then read all stories. And then again that right arrow that I showed you in another lecture. So right arrow. Okay. And so that looks pretty good. And if you take a look now and compare it to our original version, all there's left to do now is to add this background video. But that will be a separate lecture. So part 3 of building this sector. So see you then.